Hello. So, some time ago, somebody inquired if I was ever going to review Street Fighter 6. I don't have the game, but we have Street Fighter at home. So, let's see if we could work around that. So, we got Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Always a classic. We have Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. So that would technically make it Street Fighter 4. We got Super Street Fighter 2 on Super Nintendo. 2 times 3, that's 6. So we got Street Fighter 6 right here. We also have Super Street Fighter 2 on the Sega Genesis. That's going to be a bit of a problem because that bumps it up to Street Fighter 8. And that's a few decades ahead of time. And I'm almost thankful I did Street Fighter 2 ages ago, because then it would have been Street Fighter 10. You would have to stick a 20 on there, and that would be the final fight. Anyways, none of that matters, because we're going to be playing on this thing anyways, so... And also this, too.
So once upon a time, there was a game called Street Fighter. It introduced a couple neat concepts, some of which defined the style of game for generations to come. But the game itself was hot garbage. Actually, no, scratch that. It was the drizzling shits. There we go. So a few years later, in '91, they made a game called Street Fighter 2, and that pretty much defined the foundation for the modern-day one-on-one fighting game. And of course, we'd be getting more Street Fighter 2 games over the course of the next 35 years or so, and sometimes they'd throw us a bone and give us a Street Fighter 3 or a 4 or whatever, but look, none of that shit matters. Street Fighter 2 would eventually grace the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1992, a year after the arcade original hit. And it was a fine port and all, had a couple differences here and there, but it was a generally good port. Probably the best home conversion you could get at the time, especially if this was the alternative. You know, maybe this should be one of the games featured on EVO one of these years. Maybe then I'd probably watch, or give a damn for that matter, but I digress. So a year later, we got Street Fighter 2 Turbo for the Super Nintendo, and as the title suggests, this is an updated version of Street Fighter 2 that gave you the ability to play the 4 boss characters, let 2 players pick the same character, tweak some of the moves, and more importantly, allow you to play at faster speeds, hence the Turbo moniker. In truth, Turbo is a conversion of the 2 arcade updates, Champion Edition, which came out first and added the 4 playable bosses, and Hyper Fighting, which came out later and made some tweaks to the gameplay as well as increased the game speed. You have the option of playing one of 2 modes, Normal Mode, which is played under Champion Edition rules, and Turbo is played under Hyper Fighting rules, and this is where you get the adjustable speed, and some fighters also gets a few tweaks and extra moves, like Chun-Li didn't get a Fireball until Hyper Fighting, so she only has the move in Turbo mode. In any event, you only have 2 modes of play, the single-player arcade mode and the 2-player versus mode. I think both are fairly self-explanatory by this point. So the general gist of Street Fighter 2 Turbo is that if you've played Street Fighter 2, or any Street Fighter for that matter, or hell, any fighting game for that matter, there's a whole bunch of them out there, I'm sure you've touched one of the bloody things. You know what to expect. You pick a fighter, you fight other fighters with your special moves and shit, and the first one to die loses. Street Fighter 2 Turbo plays about as well as the previous SNES iteration, and that means a quality conversion of Street Fighter 2 that plays exceptionally well. Minor bits are still missing here and there. This version is apparently missing chain combos or things of that nature, but almost everything else is there. The gameplay remains generally solid and consistent. The controls are responsive and functional even with the stock SNES gamepad. You have a button config so you could set up button mapping to whatever fits your needs. The option of different speeds for Turbo is a nice option to have, and look, they even brought back the barrel breaking game that was omitted from the previous version. How I've not missed thee. Graphically, not much has changed between this version and the initial SNES port beyond the graphical changes brought about between arcade updates. This being an updated version of Street Fighter 2, Turbo reuses the same smallish sprites from the previous game, with the only change being the color changes when applicable. Everything else has slight tweaks. The mugshots and stages have been updated a bit, the versus screens look a little more like the arcade versus screen, the endings are more consistent with the arcade endings, which wasn't really the case with the original release, that pretty much did its own thing. In terms of bringing home a somewhat arcade-accurate conversion, Turbo is a little more on point, but it's still 16-bit Super Nintendo and there's still compromises to be made. Regardless, a fine looking game all things considered. Still no arcade intro, that's a bit of a shame. Sound has seen a bit of an improvement. There are more voice bites featured. Sadly, you lose the bit where the vocal pitch changes depending on the strength used, which I thought was a nice touch, but still there was an effort to try and make this as arcade accurate as possible on the hardware. Of course, what hasn't changed is the music. It's pretty much the same tracks recycled from the original SNES version, and those still sound pretty damn good, even if some of them somewhat deviate from the original tracks. Still no pinch music near defeat, the music just speeds up in that case, but again, that's no real loss. Overall, Street Fighter II Turbo is a nice update to the original SNES version and probably closer to the arcade versions than that earlier version. Which is not a slight against that first port because it's still a quality port, but this one sticks with the script somewhat. And it's a game that holds up exceptionally well, one that I'd be more than happy to bust out every so often, even when more arcade accurate conversions and emulations are available to play. Bottom line is, it's just a fun little game to play, and shit man, it's Street Fighter 2. That game's evergreen. When done right, it's almost never not good. And Street Fighter 2 Turbo is always a good time. Unless you're on the Mega Drive, then it's special. Champion Edition. Okay, that ending sucks, let's cut it out.